Our colleague from Kenya, you may begin.
Thank you very much, Judge. I was asked to speak about COVID-19 and its impact on elections, and this being a conversation about emerging electoral jurisprudence. I had also prepared 2 or 3 points on that matter. For me, the real challenge that arises from the COVID situation, at least speaking about the experience from Kenya, is the usual or too common tendency by incumbents to become predatory and take advantage of a situation like COVID-19 for purposes of slowing down their political competitors. I don't know whether everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes, so if I may speak, in the case of Kenya, for instance, one of the emerging issues is that whereas there are all these restrictions against public gatherings, against public protestations, basically against the rights of assembly, that is a core component of a democratic system of government. What we have witnessed is an increasing tendency by the law enforcement agencies to calm down very hard on persons who are either believed or perceived not to share the political ideology and vision of the regime of the day. And basically people deemed to be opposed to the current political establishment. I do not know to what extent this, in my view, bad habit may spread across the continent, especially if COVID-19 stays with the world for quite some time. The second issue, I thought that the continent would be wary about the emergence of COVID-19 and electoral and democratic processes. Even before COVID came, there were all these change the constitution movements to grant incumbents a third term or to extend their current term, to postpone elections and whatnot. And in my view, that is another area that maybe would be an area of red flags, something that our policy makers and thinkers need to reflect on, assuming, of course, the COVID-19 crisis will be with us for much longer than many of us thought. And the third point I had thought about this matter is about technology. We now live in a world where many things we thought could not be done virtually are actually now done on electronic platforms. And for the longest time, at least speaking from the experience of Kenya, the issue of technology, ICT, and elections has been a contested issue. And indeed, those who have read the judgment of the Supreme Court of Kenya that nullified the 2017 presidential election, that election was nullified because, or largely because, it was established that some people whose identities have never been known to date had hacked the servers of the electoral management body and attempted to tinker with the election results as they moved the polling stations to the county and national tallying centers. And to me, I see technology playing a bigger role than would have been imagined 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago in the management of elections. And one of the things I believe African countries have to confront is the traditional hostility by most election management bodies in our continent to integrate technology as a tool for managing elections. And of course, related to this, at least in the case of Kenya, we have a very unique history because when we changed our laws to make technology a central pillar of our election management, the thinking at that time, which was recommended by a commission of inquiry we had appointed to audit our 2007 general election, the thinking then was that the reason our elections were always controversial and the reason our elections were always bogged down by allegations of fraud and whatnot is because they were unduly manual. All the processes were manual and therefore highly amenable to manipulation and tinkering. And then, ironically, it is after we made technology such a central pillar of our elections that our presidential election was nullified for the first time in Africa, for the first time in our country. And to me, the lesson, at least what I've always picked from that experience is, can technology be a solution to bad values if a society is not committed to the ideals of free, fair, transparent election, if the whole idea of democracy is not deeply ingrained in the people? Is technology really a solution to that? And in my view, it is not. Then we now, as I said earlier on, live in a world in which technology would definitely be an integral part of election management, not just election management, but many other aspects of public life going forward. And to me, this is an area that therefore requires a lot of reflection going forward in our continent. Those are the three things I had in mind when I was asked to speak about, you know, COVID-19 and its impact on the electoral playing field. About the emerging case law, for me, there are 3 or 4 or 5 points to be noted. And what I have noted is that with the experience in Malawi, with the experience in Kenya, it is now clear that African courts, though traditionally reluctant, if persuaded, can actually call out a bad election and nullify it, which I think is good for democracy because it helps to address that myth. You know, there has been this myth for the longest time that, for instance, the presidential election cannot be nullified. And to me, the lesson really is that our courts seem prepared to depart from that history. The other thing I see as an emerging conversation, especially reading the judgments from Kenya and Malawi, is this whole idea of substantial versus strict compliance with the basic principles of election management, which is also maybe formulated as a question of results versus process. For the longest time, I think the settled case law seemed to send the message that if you get the numbers and you get yourself declared elected, especially to the presidential office, then it didn't matter how you got there. And to me, the problem with that history is the incentives for electoral fraud and manipulation that it created. So I see an emerging issue which I don't think has been resolved of results versus the process of an election, questions of quality versus quantity, which is another way of saying the same point. There is the whole question of whether election dispute management should be adversarial or inquisitorial or a blend of the two. And the reason I say this is from the cases I've studied, there's the part of the dissatisfaction on the part of many stakeholders in an electoral management system, although it is not documented, is that our judges and magistrates are usually trained in a common law adversarial process and system for purely colonial reasons. And for me, the question, therefore, is whether that approach, which applies to ordinary civil and criminal litigation, is an appropriate approach to manage questions revolving around elections, electoral processes, and democracy and whatnot. My own personal view is that it is not, and therefore there is room for a more inquisitorial approach to election dispute management. I note the court in Malawi maybe is the one that has made the biggest leap towards that direction. In Kenya, there is a lot of resistance. The other thing I'm hoping to see in our electoral processes, especially from a legal point of view, is then how do we address the colonial legacy of our institutions? Most of our institutions have their origins in the colonial state, which was not a democratic state. And the question is whether the offspring of something that was illegitimate can be legitimate, because in my view, most of the times, many African countries do layers upon layers of law reform, turning in the same result after every cycle. And in my view, is because all our institutions are built on a superstructure that has colonial origins, and I don't think upon the formal end of colonialism, and I'm using the word very deliberately, that is formal end. I don't think many of our countries actually sat down to reflect what is it they wanted now that the colonial powers were no longer running the African state, and what would work in the African context and what would not work, what could be borrowed from the colonial system. Instead, what we seem to have done is just to continue the old institutional setups, the old legal systems, the colonial machinery, except that it was now run by people of African skin and ethnicity and whatnot. And in my view, I think there's a conversation that I see being relevant. And lastly, one of the things, at least from my research, is there's a judicial culture, which I usually call legal sophistry, in which judges and magistrates in Africa don't seem to really be genuinely interested in addressing serious issues about elections. And what you have is some sort of legal gymnastics, judgments that sound, complex, learned. They sound very well researched, except that they do not address my grandmother's question. Was the damn election free, fair, and transparent, or was it not? And I think those were my reflections. I hope I have not overshot my time allocations. If I have, my sincerest apologies.
Anyway, thank you very much. I think from this presentation, we might want to look at, because one of the first points I took from the presentation is the issue of the tendency by incumbents to take advantage of the COVID-19 situation. Perhaps we might discuss how widespread that issue is. We know that despite the COVID-19 pandemic, Malawi went ahead and held this election. Are there places in Africa where elections have not been held because of the COVID-19 situation? The issue of technology, I think it might also be a double-barreled sword, depending on how efficient the technology is. I remember that when I came to observe the 2017 election, was it in Kenya, yes? When technology failed in certain of the counties or in certain districts, where it was said that people had to resort to manual because the technology, electricity had gone, and so on and so on. So there's no doubt that technology is the thing that we must embrace, because that is the only way in the future. What set me thinking about the presentation is, what do we do? Whether as individual institutions and so on, do we leave say, take the jurisprudence aspect of it? Do we leave it to develop on its own? Is there a way we can be catalysts to the development of the proper jurisprudence for Africa? I think it has been a very useful contribution with good insights, and I think we'll have occasion to discuss some of these issues. Brian, we will have the next presentation, I hope, unless there are certain issues anyone wants to raise at this point, but I would rather we get the second presentation.
That is indeed in order, Judge. The next presentation is from Ellen, who is speaking on behalf of the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Election Support Network. I also understand, given that I have the platform now, that they are somewhere having challenges with the French channel. If you look at the bottom of your panel, there's an icon marked interpretation. You need to click on the French for you to be able to access the French channel and mute original audio. That being said, I will leave Ellen to her presentation.
Thank you very much, Brian and Justice, Judge Chinhengo. I'm going to be talking about the issues that are affecting the electoral playing field in the context of COVID-19, and just also to inform our participants and colleagues that I'm not a lawyer by profession. So my presentation will be very simple in terms of the presentation itself, the content, and our understanding in terms of what are the key issues, but in relation to the judiciary also that are affecting the electoral playing field. So as an organization, we really recognize the role that the judiciary plays in the achievement, maintenance, and promotion of electoral democracy in Zimbabwe. And in order to assess the scope of this, our contribution with regards to the electoral playing field, issues that are affecting the electoral playing field in Zimbabwe amid the COVID, there's also a need for us to refer in brief to some of the pending or some of the recent court cases, and also some of the recent developments that have happened in our electoral playing field. So I will not give the history or the background of Zimbabwe elections. I'm sure most of us, we are aware of that. Most of our elections in Zimbabwe have always been contested elections. And in addition to that, of recent, we have also seen a number of challenges also by key electoral stakeholders being taken to court. I will highlight in brief the issue of the context of the fights in the opposition arising from the court judgment amid the COVID-19, whereby we had a number of MPs being recalled by the opposition political party led by Dr. Thokozani Kupe, and also the politics around that, whether that was something that was stage managed or that was something that was supposed to be really critically looked at using the legal lenses, since the cases have been coming from the court. So whereas the law requires that elected MPs and councillors be replaced through the elections within 90 days of their offices having become vacant, elections were not held in this particular instance where MPs have been recalled. Basically because of the suspension of electoral activities by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, initially indefinitely, and we managed to make noise, managed to issue press statements that it was not ideal to suspend electoral activities indefinitely. And also we had other organizations such as Veritas who also noted that in terms of any law, this was not constitutional. It was not constitutional for ZEC to suspend all election activities indefinitely. So we have also noted the move then by ZEC to gazette the vacancies that arose. And this has also paves way for respective political parties to make the necessary replacement. Already, we have seen some of the PR lists members of parliament being replaced. We have also seen Dr. Thokozani Kupe, who was a presidential candidate in the 2018 elections, now bouncing in parliament as under the PRR lists. So those are some of the new developments under the PRR list in parliament. So these are some of the new developments that we are noting in relation to elections in our country, and also in relation to the issue of replacing members of parliament during the COVID era. But of interest is that while we have replacements in the PRR, in terms of replacing members of parliament in the PRR, the members of parliament that were elected or that are supposed to be elected using the first past post electoral system in the National Assembly, the vacancies have not yet been in terms of declared or a pronouncement in terms of the date that the elections, the by-elections will be held. So on that, these are some of the conflicting decisions that we've noted as an organization, and we hope that these will be resolved. And already we have seen that there's a High Court judgment that was provided, granting a provisional order interdicting the replacement of some of the recalled, even proportional representation members of parliament. And in another similar matter, a judge of the High Court also dismissed the urgent application. In both instances, we understand that the matters were taken on appeal. So the fact that ZEC went ahead to announce or to gazette the replacement in PR with a pending court case, it's also an issue that we need also to maybe interrogate further on this platform, or even interrogate further outside this discussion as well. However, we have also noted other issues pertaining to elections that we are also continuing to interrogate and also to contribute on. For instance, recently we had our public hearings on the constitutional amendment number 2. This is a very important constitutional amendment that so many citizens, electoral stakeholders getting interested in, because it was also proposing a number of election-related amendments to the Constitution. And some of the amendments include the issue of doing away with the running mate, the issue of delinking the census and the delimitation process, so that the census is held and the data is not referred to during delimitation. So as an organization, we have also managed to contribute to the process in terms of providing the parliament with our position with regards to that particular constitutional amendment. And in addition to that, we have also managed to mobilize our members, key citizens, opinion leaders in various communities to attend the public hearings and make their verbal submissions. Of course, it was very difficult. It was not easy because of the health regulations, the issues of restrictions around movement of citizens. It was not very easy for people to go out in numbers to really make their contributions during that particular process. So these are some of the issues that we continue to grapple with as Zimbabwe, whereby our government is trying to introduce new and very key amendments that affects the electoral playing field during the COVID pandemic, whereby citizens have got challenges in terms of making significant contributions in that process. So that example of the constitutional amendment is one that I can proffer at this juncture. So basically, we have concerns on how, I think I concur with a colleague from Kenya. We have just spoken that yes, COVID has come, and we don't know how long COVID will stay with us as citizens around the world. We don't know whether COVID will stay forever. We have to live with COVID, but we need to definitely to adapt to new normal, whereby the use of ICT, use of technology it continues to increase in our view. So looking at the process like the limitation that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission is supposed to commence anytime or has already started making preparations to do delimitation. We also need to critically look at how, as civic society or as key citizen stakeholders, how we can make significant contributions around those key electoral processes such as delimitation. And also if ZEC is going to conduct the by-elections that I've already spoken or alluded to, we also need to find ways of ensuring that we also make significant contributions as citizens monitoring the process. But then the challenge comes, how do we do that and in a way that does not spread or increase the spread of COVID? And how do we also ensure that citizens are protected, voters do not get infected by participating in such critical and key electoral processes? I know there was a reference to Malawi, that Malawi held its elections during a COVID pandemic. We also need to critically look at the statistics that of the COVID cases after the election. We saw a sharp increase in the number of infections in Malawi after the election. Are we prepared? Are we prepared to expose citizens to such? And if not, what can be done? So what we've been actually recommending as an organization is that ZEC should actually engage citizens, engage stakeholders like political parties, civic society, members of parliament, on how best we can continue to make sure that we don't go against the constitution, and we do observe that key electoral processes should continue by not infecting or increasing the COVID cases in our country. So that engagement is very important, it's very necessary, and we hope that ZEC will actually hit to our cause for those stakeholder engagement with political parties. I think for now, I think I can take a break and maybe respond to questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think in answer to my earlier question about how seriously the COVID pandemic has affected the electoral playing field. If, for instance, as Ellen says, ZEC has suspended elections. I don't know whether Brian or any of you have looked at the law to see whether it was in terms of any law or it was just by administrative fiat, by which, of course, it would be a very regrettable matter that they can just suspend elections. But I think Ellen points out to the problem about what to be done. How do you balance the interests of the citizen against the dangers of the pandemic? I think that is a very important issue for consideration, and how we go around it, it remains problematic. But another point which emerges, and I think which we can discuss later, is the inability of citizens to participate in the consultations on the constitution amendment bill, which is in the offing. Of course, with COVID around us, it's not very possible for people to gather, and that by itself is a problem. The issue of census delimitation, I think it also raises another issue, whether the registration of voters, or is our delimitation based on registered voters or on population? Because you can have a district with a high population but with very few registered voters. And which way does the limitation go? But the last I heard reading from the papers was that the minister was pulling back on the amendment that would bring about changes to the delimitation situation. I don't know, perhaps in other countries like Kenya and others, we can learn on what basis the delimitation is based. Is it based on population? Is it based on registered voters? And of course, in areas where you have few registered voters, it doesn't matter what the population is like. Brian, I think with that, we can move on to the next speaker. I understand we are not going to exceed 2 hours, is it?
Yes.
Yes.
So we're hoping
Yes.
Anna is the next speaker, so we'll invite her to speak now, and she can take us through her discussion.
Hello, Anna Kathurima, please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Brian. And I'll just build upon what Muthomi and Ellen have brought up in terms of the emerging issues affecting the electoral playing ground. And now from my context here, maybe I'll broaden it up and bring the aspect of the region. And as I start, I just want us to remember that before COVID, we've had 5 elections nullified, 2 in Africa and 3 in the broader perspective of Europe and Asia. So it is a matter for us to interrogate and find out that indeed, before COVID, things and the level playing field was not balanced for the candidates and also for the players, based on so many reasons that have come out of it, some of which we know, some of which are hidden. And maybe where to start off with is the African Charter of Democracy, Elections and Governance. And this is a charter that came about in 2012. And it is a charter that looks into the conduct of elections, it's looking the conduct of governance and how countries are governed. But as we see up to today, most of countries have not ratified this charter. As it is, we are at 2020, only 46 have signed, 34 have ratified, and 34 again have deposited. So this one presents a challenge, but it does not say that the charter cannot be into effect. It is already in effect. This charter rejects and also condemns unconstitutional change of government. But we have seen in the recent times, in the recent cases, that countries and some of the heads of state, some of the leaders continue to change at will some of the term limits that come into play. For example, we've seen 11 countries have already fiddled with the term limits when it comes to, they change their constitution and they remove or they fiddle with the term limits. We've seen 4 countries that have never introduced term limits, and this one I'm talking about Africa. Then we've seen also another 4 countries have tried to remove term limits completely. So what does this present us with? We see the level of incumbency where they come and mingle and they come and try to change this constitution whereby they just do it at will. We have seen also the incumbency where it comes to the playing field. We've seen the state capture that continues to grow and continues to take and run amok in most of our countries. I know Muthomi talked about technology, and my question is, will technology cure some of the habits and the bad habits that we have on the continent today? I'll take an example of Kenya. Kenya, we have the most expensive election in Africa, whereby per voter is 25 shillings and 40 cents USD. Kenya shillings. When we change it around, it is about $25. So we ask ourselves, why is it this expensive? We know it is because of technology. But has technology cured most of our problems in Kenya? No. We have a trust deficit in this country, where I see my own ballot paper that I go to vote with has more security features than even the currency that I go to buy things with. Why so much of those security features are enshrined in that ballot paper? It's because of trust deficit. And then we have the aspect where now we go into technology. We remember our 2017 election was nullified because there was a lot of irregularities and a lot of illegalities where technology was concerned. The things that the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission, IBC, was supposed to do, it didn't do. So in this aspect, we had an election that was nullified. Then come later, we had to go back. But were those issues addressed? Here we are 2 years down the line, and we are about to go for an election. Most of those things we've not addressed. We've not audited this technology, which we are going to use come the 2022 election. So what are we going to see? Are we going to see a repeat of 2017? We know we'll have a new Chief Justice by then. But when this Chief Justice comes, are we assured that he will go on further, maybe, and nullify the next election that comes up? Those are the issues that we are grappling with. Then COVID comes, and here we are. Do we postpone elections or do we not postpone election? We've seen the aspect of Ethiopia. Ethiopia, the Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, has postponed indefinitely the elections. So we don't know when the elections are going to be held next. But when we look at the constitution, his term lapsed in October of this year. So what does that do? It presents us with a constitutional loophole. Who is going to cure that? And we have seen, and we continue to see that most of these strong leaders are hiding behind the COVID pandemic to do all manner of things and all manner and things that are not excusable when it comes to the elections. When we come to the place like Uganda, Uganda is supposed to hold the elections come next year. That is around either February or March. And the president has said it is going to be a scientific elections. Candidates are supposed to campaign using the social media. And now this presents the challenge of what is the penetration of the internet in Uganda. In Africa, we know, internet only penetrates about 39%. So now in the aspect of the Ugandans, how are they going to hear what their leaders have for them come when they're doing the campaigns? When I look at the aspect of the media, how free is it that candidates like Bobi Wine and the rest are able to go and articulate their issues? We've seen in the recent past where one of the candidates went to one of the radio stations and he was charged about $800 for only 1 hour interview. So my question is, how many of these candidates can afford this money? And here I put in the women, here I put in the persons with disability, here I put in the young people. How many have $800 to spare for a 1 hour campaign in the media? And then also we have seen that the government was to give people free radios so that they can hear what has to be said by either the government or the opposition. But my question is, how many of these opposition parties and opposition candidates will be able to get a free access, to get free airtime in those digital spaces? So when I look about it, my mind runs amok and I'm like, are we going to have a level playing field when it comes to elections in Africa? Then I come to the aspect of incumbency. We've seen incumbencies, they continue to disregard the total law. And here when I say the rule of law, in my country, for instance, we have seen the president, he continues to violate the rule of law anyhowly, and there's nothing we can do about it. When we go to other jurisdictions, we've seen what happened in Mali, and my question comes back to the citizens are celebrating what the military has done, but ECOWAS and other players are up in arms. We have sanctions have already been slapped on Mali. And question is, when the people are rejoicing in the street, where the president has been arrested, where the president has been brought to account, in this aspect, where is the line drawn? Do we say, yes, it was an unconstitutional change of government? Do we say the citizens arrested the president? What do we put the tagline to be? And also now maybe to wind up is that I still come back to the technology. we have to rethink how we do the technology. Most of the countries are rethinking, should we go postal voting way? Do we go the electronic voting way? But as we look at it, for us is to have that conversation. Will it enhance the trust? Will it speak on behalf of the people? Will it speak on behalf of the citizens? Are we going to, do we have jurisdiction? Do we have the capacity to own our own technologies? Because most of these technologies do not come from us, but we buy it from the Western world. But now when we domesticate it back into our country, is it going to be a free, a fair, and a credible process? These are some of the things we need to look on as we speak about the level playing field. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. When was Ethiopia supposed to hold elections?
The elections were supposed to be in August 16th of this year. Yeah, this year, August 16th.
Yeah, because I think the point which has been raised by the previous speakers about incumbents taking advantage of COVID situation, I think that is a typical example, because if you postpone elections indefinitely, that means, of course, you remain in place, isn't it? And the issue is, again, what Ellen talked about. How do you balance the two issues? Elections, the pandemic, the interests of the ordinary citizen. Technology, again, continues to feature. And I think the question which Anne has just raised, whether technology will cure the bad habits, I think is one of the issues we need to interrogate, and to able to say, what are those bad habits which even technology won't be able to cure? Yes, Brian? Is Brian still?
Yes, Judge. I think there are quite a number of issues that are emerging. And
Yes.
On the issue of technology, I hope we'll have an opportunity to listen to Mary Stella talking about the preparedness of the courts.
Yes.
We keep talking about the role of technology in these elections, but how prepared are the courts able to deal with issues of technology coming in within the courts? But this now leads us to the discussion from Judge Ogola, and then we'll hear from Dr. Mutemba at the end before we go into the question and answer.
Yes, Judge, please go ahead. Judge?
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
Is it my turn now?
Yes, it is your turn now.
Oh, how are you, my brother, Judge Moderator?
Thank you very much. I'm fine.
I've been listening to all the participants and analysts.
Yes.
And they have exhausted the issues that are in mind. Let me start with bringing you greetings of us, greetings from Uganda. We have an election coming up in February 2021. And all the candidates are out prowling like lions in the field looking for votes. To the extent that the Minister of Health and the President and everybody in power have already recognized that there is going to be a terrible problem. The pandemic, the figures have just shot up in the last week or so when the election started. And we are calling campaigns as some of the epicenter of the figures rise, the spike in the statistic. Indeed, we have shot from 0 deaths to about 22 and still climbing, of course. The number of infections per day are now average 100 plus. And so the question is, we still go on with the elections and face death? There's a big choice between election and death. The Electoral Commission review that they will do something that they call a hybrid between scientific election, which is taught digital and all that stuff, or a little bit of the traditional mingled with the tech. The people, the candidates, the electorate, and anybody who is ever in this game has thrown all caution to the windows. And when you move up and down the country, you find processions, massive processions of people singing, ululating, carrying leaves and all manner of stuff. They all huddle together, no respect for social distancing or wash hands or any of that. And so figures are already look very, very, very bad. In fact, I expect the president of the country to address the nation anytime today, tomorrow, or something like that, because figures are really frightening. The big issue is, do you still hold election in case of death? It's certain death, there's no question about that. Or do you find a way to postpone it or do something about it and then come back later? Terrible question is, later is when? Under Constitution, elections cannot be postponed except for two reasons. Reason number one, a state of emergency already declared. Reason number two is a state of war. To attain to a state of emergency, the president needs to consult with his cabinet and find that there is a threat to the state in terms of foreign invasion or aggression, in terms of internal insurgency, or there is a last one on that list in terms of natural disaster. Is corona natural disaster? Is it natural? Disaster, certainly it is a disaster. It is a disaster because it brings to a halt all economic activity, all the commerce of the country comes down. Indeed, only yes, I think the headquarters of our police had to close down, so they found a couple of senior people there who have already tested positive and closed down the headquarters of the police. That is terrible. That's the ramifications of this pandemic. International flights, aviation and what have you, all closed down. The borders are locked up. Places of worship, mosques, churches, temples, locked down. The offertories, the offerings in churches are locked up. Nobody goes there to offer anything. The ministers of the church, the pastor and the priests, are locked up, have no income. So, corona, by definition, is, to my mind, is already of emergency. It's a crisis. A crisis not just in this one country, a crisis all across the planet. We have not had anything, seen anything like this for the last 100, 200 years, maybe. So I do not see how anybody can argue that this is not a state of emergency, minus the declaration by resolution of Parliament. That has not been done. My understanding is that in places like Botswana, maybe I'm getting wrong, but I think it was Botswana, they started a fight against corona by declaring a state of emergency, because they knew there are lots of things that to be done beyond the constitution and more legal rights. So they already declared a state of emergency. In Uganda, we not. Should we? Should we not? Issue number two, even if we were able to do an action in the face of this calamity of a pandemic, and we do it half scientific and so on, would the result of that election be free and fair? Where is the personal touch? If you go all digital, where personal touch between the candidate and the electorate. The traditional way is to have candidate and electorate meet face to face, ask the hard questions, weigh each other up, and make a decision, and go with the perception, at least the perception, that was all fair and free. In this current situation, where is that? Where is the fairness? Where's the freedom? We have had a tradition, I think all over Africa now, that whenever we have elections and other places, you bring in others who are disinterested, who are neutral, so to speak. These are called election observers. They are not necessitated below, they're not a requirement. But at least they give perception of free fairness. They give evidence and witness to that elliptical idea, free and fair. In a state of corona, borders are closed, people are fearful, go anywhere to travel. We will be robbed of that ingredient of international people come to watch, assess our elections. There's going to be another issue. When petitions arise out of an election, one person feels they were cheated and they run to the courts, the idea is to have expeditious disposition of that petition. In a state of corona, our courts, at least in the Ugandan context, working, yes, they are working from far distance. They do not meet face to face. They sort of use the digital and what have you. For me, there's still an issue there that should there arise electoral petitions in a state where courts are not free to move, not free to discuss issues. They're not free to, having had the evidence, to sit as a panel and deliberate in secrecy. You can't very well deliberate like we're doing now, when everybody else can listen in and watch in. So I see that there's going to be an emerging issue there of how to keep the integrity of the electoral process, even after you've had an election, if indeed you have an election. My view is that the pandemic is a terrible thing. It should be equated to a state of war. In many leaders have called this a war. We are fighting war. As I said before, the economy is on its knees. People have died. If you count them all across the globe, I don't know how many millions have died without even a single shot of the gun, any of that. How far can we go without calling this one a state of war? And so I feel myself that indeed Ethiopia may have done something that we should borrow from. I do not know the internal mechanisms of Ethiopia. I do not know the details, their situation, but I see a hope of light there. That faced with the death or election, I would rather postpone the election if that will save human life, and then pick up whenever is possible to do so. I always equate this to a position where a house is on fire and you call in the firefighters. When the firefighters come, they do not stop at the gate to ask whether inside husband and wife need privacy. They do not stop to see if the children are doing their school homework, and therefore their right to education. They walk in and take the water and blow out the fire. Those other questions can come later. Those other issues can come later. I feel personally that the state of the corona, what I call the corona, which has been thrown over the faces of all the earth, requires extreme measures. It is an abnormality. We cannot pretend that it's normal, and that therefore we use the constitution or any of those processes as if we were in a normal situation. It's abnormal. And in my view, if it means postponing,
Are we still together? Looks like the judge has some challenges over there. Judge Ogalo? I think technology is failing us for the time being. Is that so? Can you confirm, Brian?
I think we may have lost him. His feed is echoing, but we cannot hear from him, and his picture is still. I would propose that we go to Dr. Matembe's presentation, then open it up for Q&A.
All right. I think one point which the judges mentioned there, which is a position, whether we agree with it or not, I think it will be a matter for discussion. The judge has been quite forthright in saying that, well, the COVID pandemic is like a war, and you would rather elections were postponed rather than expose the population to the dangers of the pandemic. I think the judge is back. Judge, are you rounding off? Can you hear us now?
I'd been cut off, I'm sorry.
Yes, but if you could round off, I'll be quite grateful.
But I have concluded my remarks.
Sorry?
Hello?
Yes?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I had concluded my remarks. I don't know when I was cut off, but my conclusion was that if in the face of pandemic, we feel that elections should be postponed, we should not give it a thought. Life is a lot more valuable than an election. You can't postpone an election. You cannot postpone a life.
And I think it raises another question there, which we can discuss. What do those countries without the legal provisions for postponing an election do? How are we going to handle it? At least in Uganda, from your presentation, there's a process by which an election can be postponed. But I doubt very much whether in all countries, in all the countries, either in our region or in many other places, there's provision for elections to be postponed. I'm not aware whether in Zimbabwe there's any such provision. I doubt that there is. The constitution seems to be very clear that the term is 5 years for parliament, and on the expiry of that 5 years, the election must be held. Brian, I think, thank you very much, Judge. As I had said while you were probably cut off, I said that you have made a very, you have taken a very firm position that if you were to make a choice between postponing an election and exposing the population to the pandemic, you would rather the election was postponed. But anyway, we can discuss that later. Brian, shall we have the next speaker, please?
Yes, Judge. Dr. Matembe, you have the floor.
Oh, dear me. Nowhere.
Have you unmuted, Judge? Dr. Matembe?
Yeah.
Have you unmuted?
Do you want me to continue?
Unmute and continue, yes. Unmute.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you. But anyway, carry on.
Oh, let me see if I can be seen again. But you have raised a very fundamental question that given our constitutions, which do not easily provide for postponement of an election, which if 5 years is a high or something provision, I want to send the question back to us. Our constitutions are pretty big. They have so many provisions. Uganda, I think, has 300 provisions. You find something where you can peg a need like that one. Take the Constitution of the USA. It's a very thin booklet. It has lasted 300 years or so. Where did they get the genius to interpret that very thin document to give the life for 300 years? I believe that our constitutions too, if the judges give it the genius that it takes, can still find a way to preserve life of earth in the first election. In Uganda, we still have some hope, some little outlet of interpreting the Constitution in a way that will preserve life and escape death.
Yes, thank you very much, Judge. Shall we hear Dr.
Was I on?
I think we will come back to the
Thank
discussion.
you.
We'll come back to the discussion, but let's hear Dr. Matembe. Doctor, are you on now? Brian, are you
Yes.
able to assist? Should there be a problem?
What were you saying?
It's your turn now to make your presentation.
Hey, was I supposed to make presentation because I'm now in a vehicle traveling?
Oh no, don't worry. If you are traveling, that's fine. I think,
Hey.
but you can hear us. You are with us, isn't it?
Yes, I've been listening until I decided, here we have traffic jam. So I said, well, let me get into the vehicle.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Travel while I listen. So I've been hearing Justice Ogalo. He has been telling Ugandans we must stop elections, but they are going on. They are not hearing us.
Yeah. Anyway, since you are not making a presentation, that's fine. You can listen in. Then we will all participate when we come to the question and answer session. Brian.
Yes, Judge. As I had indicated, there were two discussions that we had included as part of the overall process. Dr. Mutangi will talk us through some of the issues that we're seeing on a burden of proof that are emerging from the jurisprudence that is there available. He will not be more than 2 minutes. Then after that, we'll hear from Mary Stella, Simiyu, who will talk about elections, about the preparedness of the courts to deal with the issues of technology in elections. So we will, I think at this stage, hand over the floor to Dr. Mtangi. Then soon after his presentation, we will hear from Mary Stella.
And I hope Dr. Mtangi would also address if he can, the issue earlier raised about, I think it was our colleague from Uganda, from Kenya, when he talked about our inheriting of colonial approaches and procedures, whether in respect of elections, the approach should be inquisitorial or adversarial, and in the event of taking one or other of those approaches, how do you deal with the burden of proof? Dr. Mtangi, you can go ahead. Is Dr. Mtangi available? Doesn't look like, right?
He is online, Chair. I'm not sure why we cannot hear him. Maybe we can ask Mamutu to change his status or unmute his mic.
Yeah, I think he needs to unmute his mic.
Okay, no problem.
Oh dear.
Do you hear us, Dr. Mtangi? I think while he tries to get connected, Brian, shall we proceed to, you were talking about Mary Stella, isn't it? Is Mary Stella available? Brian, are you doing anything?
We're trying to see if we can change their status. I'm not sure why their mics are not turning on. Mamu, can you assist us with Mary Stella's mic, and she should be able to speak now. She sent a message saying she needs her mic unmuted. There we go.
I think you can hear me now, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, Justice. I very much enjoy the presentations from the panel. And I'm in agreement that this is actually a particularly important discussion for all stakeholders in the electoral field. But my intervention just comes from an appreciation of the increasing influence of technology on democracy and elections. And true, as the presenters have mentioned, that more and more African countries are integrating technology into the electoral processes even before COVID. But beyond the issue of election technology, we can also see that the electorate are making use of the digital space for electoral discourse and to exercise their freedom of speech, as well as to access critical information on the electoral process. But it's very actually unfortunate to hear about incidences of internet shutdowns, which have become especially prevalent during elections, and it does affect public participation. On the other hand, the digital space has also raised concerns around the spread of disinformation as well as misinformation in online platforms. And this does have a negative effect on how public discourse happens, and it does threaten the ability to conduct a free, fair, and credible process that genuinely represents the will of the people. But this is an aspect that I feel has not been critically examined in election petitions, although we did see it, for example, in Kenya during 2017, as well as in countries like Nigeria, where misinformation and disinformation was there, but it was not actually examined in the election petitions. But even beyond, when you look at issues of both the election technology and disinformation and misinformation, given the system that we are in, the parties do have, how they present their petitions, how they present technological evidence to the court is very crucial, because it's very important in how they will guide the courts in determining whether the technological evidence and how it was used, or well, how it was implemented, whether it did have actually an impact on the credibility of the electoral process. But when we zero in on the issue of disinformation, we can see countries like South Africa have launched platforms such as the Real 411 to counter disinformation. And this can be actually used in the event there's any election petition. This can be actually used to show how disinformation has impacted the electoral landscape. And so because of this, I feel stakeholders need to pay more attention moving forward on how they address misinformation and disinformation during elections, and with a focus more towards encouraging digital literacy and guiding the courts in the process as opposed to punitive measures. And beyond these stakeholders, particularly the judiciary, and here we also have to look at the election management body, we have to look at the legislature and civil society. They need to deliberately engage in activities that enhance their knowledge and skill capacity in the digital field. And now this goes to the heart of judicial preparedness. They need to enhance their knowledge and capacity in this field. And this, beyond looking at how your systems are protected, it includes an examination of the cyber hygiene practices of organizations as well as individuals and influential persons at that. For example, you need to look at what regular security updates are there in your system, what backup systems are there, what strong firewalls are there, do you use secure Wi-Fi's, do you use good VPNs when you're working remotely? Because if you remember the 2017 election petition in Kenya, one of the reasons that the election management body used to prevent access to the server was that it was not secure and there was a security risk to this. And the court did counter and say, given how much Kenya spent on the election, security should have been an essential aspect of this. So moving forward, stakeholders should encourage the EMB as well as the judiciary to make sure their systems are well protected. If evidence is needed from these systems, they'll be able to access them without having an excuse of security risk, or even just putting their systems at risk to penetration. And this, we say this coming from a position that incidences of hacking is a reality in this day and age. And well, Muthomi Thiankolu did talk about it, that it was deliberated during the 2017 presidential election petition in Kenya, but because of lack of evidence, this was an aspect that was not comprehensively examined. And my other colleague did mention that this leaves our system still vulnerable to remote intrusion in the 2022 coming elections. But beyond that, another aspect I believe the judiciary and other stakeholders need to be more critical about is that targeted malinformation is also a reality in this day and age. And so your personal cyber hygiene practices should be there to ensure that no private information of somebody can be used or held against them, and in such a way to compromise their integrity in case they have to make any critical decision in the electoral parlance. I think I'll stop there, but that was my contribution when it comes to just general preparedness when it comes to digital related threats and election petitions. Thank you very much, Justice and Brian.
Thank you very much. I think this is an interesting short presentation, especially with regard to technology, because I don't think we have an option against use of technology anymore. I think the world has changed. We have to use the technology. And it's a question of how far the use of technology can be controlled, and if it must be controlled. I mean, if we are talking about disinformation like Mary Stella has just been talking about, are we going to criminalize disinformation? What are we going to do about it? If we are talking about hacking, what do the election management bodies have to do to prepare themselves and to secure themselves against such interferences? And I think earlier on, one of the speakers talked about technology not being our technology. I remember in Kenya, if I'm correct, I stand to be corrected, the servers were not in Kenya. I think the servers at that time were actually in France, so that if you wanted to do anything about the servers, you would have to go all the way to France. And I think until the case was heard, people didn't know that the servers are actually in France. Everyone thought they were in Kenya. But anyway, these are some of the difficulties that do arise. But we have to acknowledge that the world has changed. There's no going back on technology. It doesn't matter what we desire. And we have got to see how to use it to best advantage. And of course, the evidence, as Mary Stella was talking about, how technological evidence is to be used in court. I think that's one of the issues which will need to be studied and analyzed. We have, do we have the last speaker? I see now we have been an hour and a quarter in this discussion. Brian?
Judge, we don't seem to have a Dr. Mtangi online. So my proposal is that we proceed to the question and answer section of the discussion. For the benefits of colleagues, we have quite a number of ways that questions can be raised. We have the Q&A panel, which is at the bottom of your screen. You can raise a question in that panel, and you can also raise a question on the chat platform. But the easiest way and the most appropriate way to have your voice heard is to put your hand up, and we'll be able to pick up which hands are up. For now, Judge, there are a few questions that have been put on the question and answer panel, which we can start to look at first, then take additional questions with your permission thereafter.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead, Brian.
So the first question is...
Yes?
The first question relates to the use of technology. And the question reads, and it's from, I hope I will not distort the name, but it's Petlan, who is a member of the Electoral Tribunal in Lesotho. They ask, the very apt series of questions regarding technology from Anna's issue of trust by the electorate specifically, and whether technology would make our elections more efficient, including curing leaders' bad habits. So I think the question, I think you've raised that at some point as well, whether some of the ill effects that we've seen in elections, in election petitions in the past, can be remedied by technology. And the second part of the question reads, an even deeper question would be the place and the function of legal practitioners and functionaries in this process. She claims not, he points out that they are not a lawyer. I find that there is great benefit in what my team does, as it also includes public educationists, sociologists, sociological understanding of the context and the basis of resolving beyond the legal framework. So I think the question seeks to understand what role then should be played by legal practitioners in the courts. And I think it also suggests that there might be a role to be played by having a broader a group of practitioners deal with election dispute resolutions. I'm not sure if I've aptly captured your comments and interventions as they are set out in the Q&A.
So those are the two questions so far, is it?
There are more, Judge.
Can we have two more so that we can discuss the first four?
The other question is from Hamosa Lubabu, who makes the comment that is there technology that Africans are scared of, or it's a question of trust, or in the people that have been entrusted to handle the technology.
Yes.
And the last question, of course, there are also shortcomings, including the content and the jurisprudence of Election Dispute Resolution Forum. Where does the law stop and politics begin? In the end, elections continue to be about winning and losing, access to power. They may be rooted, they may be the root of some of the interactable bad habits all around. I'm not sure the import or whether this is just a comment that has been made.
Yes, I think in respect of the first question on technology, I would invite our friends from Kenya. As Anne said earlier on, and Mr. Muthomi there, Kenya has invested heavily in technology. Are you able to respond to this issue about technology, including the place and function of lawyers and the involvement of other people, sociologists and so on, in election dispute resolution? Either Anne, would you want to start on that? Hello?
I'm not a lawyer.
Yes.
Maybe I hope Muthomi, maybe if he can say something and then I can,
No
but
problem.
On your side, the issue about the need to broaden the persons who are involved in election dispute resolution, because as it has been so far, it's only lawyers and judges and the legally trained people, and no involvement of other persons skilled in other disciplines. I think the same point was made by Ellen as well, who said, well, I am not a lawyer, but you can see that there's a lot of contribution that can come from non-lawyers. Lawyers tend to look at the law, they are dogmatic about issues and so on and so on. Would you care to just deal with that aspect, the involvement of non-lawyers in election dispute resolution? And perhaps on that point, Ellen could also say something.
Okay. Let me speak on the context of Kenya, and especially during election years. We usually have 3 forms of the EDR, the Electoral Dispute and Resolution Mechanism. We first have the courts, which deal with the dispute resolution. Then we have the political parties tribunal, which also deals with those resolution. And then we have the EMB component, which we call, in our case, we call it the IEBC EDR. And those 3 components are supposed to deal with any arising issues on electoral dispute, especially before election. And if I remember correctly, in our case, that was in 2017. And when we were observing this process, for us, it was like a process that contradicted each other, because we started with a process of mass voter registration. And immediately after that, we went into political party primaries. So out of the issues that were rising out of the party primaries, those were issues now, either of the 3 components were supposed to deal with them. And if you remember, I bring you back, the IEBC, which is the EMB, had already brought out its work plan on how things will run. So we were supposed to have party primaries up to this time. Then from there, the nominations go up to this time. And then now from there, that is when now the printing of the ballot papers was supposed to begin. But that exercise in itself was marred with so many controversies, so many court cases. And if Muthomi can remember, I can't even remember how many court cases IBC had either they had been sued or they had to go to court for interpretation. And this somehow mingled and also brought into disarray the process or the work plan of the IEBC. So now when I come back to the EDR process, you find the political parties tribunal had given a jurisdiction on a matter on this side. Then when you go to the the political parties, which is the parties now, the IDRM, which is the internal dispute resolution mechanism, they also have they come up with this jurisdiction, or they solve a matter on this manner. Then this person now finds that he's at crossroads and he goes to the High Court for them to find relief. When they go to High Court, they find, oh, this thing has already lapsed. So I'm already locked out of the nomination process. So in the case of the 3 processes that were running, for me, I saw a lot of confusion as an observer. And now if it is something that goes further and come to the 2022 election, it is something that has to be articulated in a process that if I don't find justice in the political party, I can go to the political parties tribunal. If I don't find any reprieve in the political parties tribunal, then I can cascade further, go to the High Court and find reprieve. And even if not the High Court, I can still go to the IEBC dispute resolution mechanism and find reprieve. So this is something that needs to be streamlined so that there is no one that is bigger than the other, and there is no one that seems to overlook the jurisdiction of the other. Maybe Muthomi, you can add more. Yeah.
Yes, may I have Ellen before Muthomi, then you can deal with the issues raised by our non-lawyer friends. But I thought the other point which we must emphasize is what should be the ideal composition of a dispute resolution body? Should it consist of the lawyers only, or it must involve other persons with particular skills, social scientists, and so on and so on?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Judge. Of course, the non-lawyers, we should speak first, and the lawyers correct us. I think one thing that I take a cue from this discussion is that the laws that we have are not for lawyers, but they are for everyone, for every citizen of the country. So as domestic observers or as non-lawyers, what we expect also from our legal friends, the lawyers, is to provide capacity in terms of interpretation of the law to the non-lawyers, to the citizens, simplified information, simplified materials, and education. One thing I've noted in our elections in Zimbabwe, we have had a number of petitions by political parties being dismissed, sometimes on technicalities, you know, very sound, very good petitions that you actually think, this one will definitely sail through and there will be a positive outcome. Then the next minute you hear it has been dismissed on technicality basis. So there's been more like an issue of taking advantage of the lack of knowledge by those who are non-lawyers or general citizens or even political parties. Some of them are not aware of the processes. Some of them do not even have strong legal units within their political parties. So the training is very, very important to be provided for by lawyers to non-lawyers and also to political parties. In addition, there should also be other dispute resolution mechanisms besides the courts, where political parties or citizens can take their issues for resolution. I'll give an example like the multi-party liaison committees that we have in Zimbabwe. Those are very good platforms to deal with dispute resolution when it comes to petty or what I can call minor cases between political parties. So there's need for us to ensure that those platforms or those mechanisms are strengthened and they are also capacitated to handle minor or general petty disputes within political parties. And in addition to that, there's also the need for us as a civic society or organizations working on elections to actually be able to track election petitions, election court cases, and see how they are resolved. And also to analyze how these cases are resolved and to analyze whether the judiciary is independent enough to handle some of these petitions or electoral issues. So basically, I think what I'm saying is there's need for us to appreciate that, yes, in as far as we are concerned as non-lawyers, we also need to appreciate what it entails when it comes to what is provided for in the law and be able to analyze and also be able to receive simplified information from our colleagues and educate the citizens when it comes to election-related litigation and interpretation of the law in general. So I think we have a role to play, I agree. As non-lawyers, we have a role to play, but we need to be capacitated by our colleagues who can interpret the law better and who has got knowledge on how the different dispute resolution mechanisms work, the advantages, disadvantages of each dispute resolution mechanism, and how we can also help strengthen the different mechanisms that are in place. I think that's my response, Judge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, yes, you are right there. In Zimbabwe, at least there's the multi-party liaison committee, which addresses some of the difficulties that can arise during an election. But one element which is missing in Zimbabwe's electoral system, I think maybe Mr. Muthomi, when you come in, you can shed some light on that. The Electoral Management Board in Zimbabwe has no decision-making power. Unless the Electoral Act is amended. It's unlike in South Africa where it can deal with matters which are not legal, which are administrative, and it can be taken on review on in respect of those matters. But in Zimbabwe, I think I'm right that we don't have a mechanism for our electoral management body to deal with certain disputes, especially of an administrative nature. Yes, Mr. Muthomi.
Yes, Judge, maybe I should begin on the question of the issue your colleague raised, which I think would be a more problematic issue going forward, COVID-19 versus postponing elections and whatnot. Maybe I'm out of order, but I'm one of those who strongly believe that the biggest existential threats facing African people today is not COVID-19, but bad leadership, corruption, poverty, underdevelopment, and things of that type. And whereas COVID-19 is here and real, maybe it is only in vogue. It's now the thing in fashion in terms of our threats. I do not consider it to be the most deadly threat. I could bet my small inheritance that there are more Africans between December last year and today who have died of corruption, who have died of bad leadership than have died of COVID. But I think it's a very complex matter which we can't exhaustively deal with in a forum like this. Technology versus trust, law versus non-law approaches to the agenda of the day. My view as there was an interjection.
No, carry on.
Oh, my view has always been that we tend to look at African problems in isolation, so that if you have a forum like this dominated by lawyers, then the discussion takes a legal-centric approach. If you have another dominated by economists, the discussion takes a predominantly economic approach. And I'm one of those who have always advocated for a more holistic view. My view is that the challenges of democracy in Africa are to be seen from a political economy of Africa dimension. Who does the African state work for? Why is it that our elections are always contested? Why is it that most incumbents are unwilling to leave office? Is it because they really love the citizens of Africa so much? Is it because they are dying of serving them and rendering exemplary service to them? So that to me, you need a much broader, deep understanding of a very complex problem, and not even a lawyer like me, because there is a thread that is emerging that lawyers have the answers. Actually, this is what I warn against in all these discussions, that the African problem has to be looked, in my view, from a multidisciplinary point of view. Whatever that problem is, for purposes of this discussion, of course, the problem is elections and democracy and whatnot. So that to me, then, if you have that broader view, technology then becomes a very small issue. COVID becomes a very small issue, and it's a much more broader discussion of how do we address the sort of issues that make other civilizations look down upon the African people, that make other people say we are the scar on the conscience of humanity and whatnot. The things that basically make us lag behind on the general parameters and indices of human development. Of course, technology can improve administrative efficiency of conducting elections. Technology can greatly improve the efficiency of managing electoral dispute resolution, but technology cannot make up for a bad ethos. Technology cannot make up for institutions that are poorly designed, for legal systems that are built on a colonial superstructure, for institutional systems that were never designed to serve the African people. And by the African people, I mean the typical African man or woman working in some rugged village, not the people on this forum, because I think people like you and I, we are actually only African by ethnicity. Looking beyond that, the people on this platform having this chat are actually more of cosmopolitan international citizens. Of course, on the details, some of us are citizens of Kenya and whatnot. So to me, then we need to address why is it that the African state is not working for the African people. And of course, the issues being raised about vulnerabilities of technology, the Kenyan servers being hosted in France, to me, these are just inherent challenges of technology all over the world. I mean, just the other day, the Americans had this never-ending discussion about the Russians having hacked into, I don't know, Hillary Clinton's email systems and then having influenced the election of Donald Trump. To me, it just shows the inherent dangers of technology. And I don't think there is anything in this world that does not have its other side. So to me, the challenge therefore is how do we leverage on technology, and how do we then address the unique challenges that come with an election that is highly technological in the way it is managed. If Zimbabwe were to consider conferring its election management body with decision-making powers, with the dispute resolution powers, then I would urge them to be very careful before adopting the Kenyan example, because what we have had in Kenya is that our laws have created two overlapping non-judicial forums, one of which is the election management body, and the other one is the political disputes tribunal. And in fact, we have the political parties themselves. And what I have seen from the litigation is that there has been a lot of confusion as to whether the electoral management body should be presiding over disputes in an election that it is itself, presiding over and whatnot. And my own view is that the Kenyan example will not be a good one. And if it is, then it has to be thought much more carefully than simply borrowing it, because it has its own very many problems, which we may not be able to delve into. Kenyan law permits the election management body to postpone elections, but not at a countrywide level. It can postpone elections in a county, in a district, in a division, in a constituency, but we also do not seem to have legal provisions that can empower a wholesale cancellation or postponement of an election in the manner I have heard has happened, say, in Ethiopia and whatnot. What is the role of lawyers in all these things? From my observation of the Kenyan system, lawyers have both been the problem, but they have also been victims of a system that is too colonial in origin. The real issue to me is not whether to involve both lawyers and non-lawyers in electoral dispute resolution or in the management of elections in general. The real challenge for me has always been, what is the type of training our lawyers and judges receive in their law schools? And does that type of training prepare them for the challenges of the world of the 21st century that we live in? The reason I raise this, if I may use the example of Kenya, since 1967 to date, the core legal curriculum that all Kenyan lawyers and judges have undergone since all that time focuses on 16 subjects that were recommended by a commission appointed shortly after independence, where the main concern was to Africanize the legal profession. And the focus was the so-called bread and butter issues, so that the type of lawyers we produce, lawyers who can do small bread and butter things at the civil division of the court, at the human rights division, but we do not seem to have lawyers who can play at the global stage, at ICSID, at the WTO panels, at the International Court of Justice, at whatever other level. So to me, part of the problem is that we produce lawyers who are ill-equipped to play as the leading role they should be playing in resolving some of these evolving and very complex challenges of the world we now live in. And the challenge really belongs to the law schools, to the authorities that regulate legal training and education in African countries. I believe there is certainly value that non-lawyers could add to dispute resolution. What I do not know, for purposes of electoral dispute resolution, most countries in the world, not just in Africa, rely on the mainstream courts, and we do not appoint ad hoc, courts to deal with the elections. At least that's not the general approach. If it exists anywhere, it is the exception rather than the norm. And then the question would be, what do you do with that manpower after the election? I mean, an election comes every once in 5 years and goes. So I do not know. My own view is that there is nothing special, there is nothing complex about the elections or electoral dispute resolution, and that all these complexities about the African state and its elections and its mixed experience with democracy have to be seen in their pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial legacies. And as long as we've not addressed the foundations to really speak to the needs and the unique situation of our people, as long as our laws and institutions are copy-pastes of models that someone has come from outside of Africa and said, this is how you do it, this is how you resolve it, then we are going to be having many more of these discussions for too long. I believe the question of technicalities is to be seen from, again, the type of legal training. How much do our legal curriculums in our law schools emphasize, for instance, a law and economics approach to legal issues, a law and sociology approach, an African perspective to democracy, the Africans' experience with the state? I don't know how frequent these are themes in the training of our lawyers and judges, so that it is not enough for me for a Kenyan judge to say the House of Lords in the year 1902 resolved this matter. I mean, the House of Lords was deciding a matter involving an English election in which the voters were English, in which the predominant culture for the political players was English, in which there was perhaps very little of ethnic mobilization, in which the level of violence was very little, in a system in which the state was legitimate. The state actually exists to serve the interests of the citizens of that country, not maybe a post-colonial or Western hegemonic agenda. So in my view, what we are doing today maybe should be the starting point of a series of discussions, which I hope going forward then can be more holistic. And I am one of those who would encourage a rich blend of lawyers and non-lawyers to address these issues, and even to be involved in any sort of law reform that may be necessary. And at the end of the day, I think, as we are told, it is always a question of what do we do? What do we want as a people? What do our citizens of our countries want? How do we encourage, Judge, you asked, how do we catalyze the development of appropriate jurisprudence? And I think the tried and tested methods are, we must debate, we must critique judgments. In Kenya, there was a lot. What a lot of people don't realize is that there was a lot of discussion, both in journals, in books, in workshops like this one we're holding, about the correctness of the decision that the Supreme Court of Kenya had made in the year 2013. And that discussion is still going on in Kenya. And I'm one of those who believe that although it is less acknowledged, part of the reason our Supreme Court took a 180-degree turn and actually nullified the 2017 presidential election is the robust debate. People like the people on this webinar, people in our universities, people in our legal professions, the bar societies and whatnot, were holding. And I think the decibels were just too many, and it was clear to our Supreme Court that they had gotten it wrong, and they had let down the country in a big way. And now we are where we are. I think we are now much in a better place than we were in 2013. So what I'm suggesting is, in summary, the more we have discussions like this, and the more we complement them with other ways of addressing these issues. If we publish books by Africans, journals by Africans, research conducted by Africans in our respective countries, then at the end of the day, we will be richer. And I always remind people, because we are socialized to, to over-criticize ourselves. The truth is we have very many problems that we should not be having. But then some of the people who criticize us loudest, if you go to their, their Magna Carta of 1200, if you go to the French Revolution of 1789, if you go to the American War of Independence, they have had a greater time to experiment with some of these things. The political and ethnic compositions of their countries is much more homogeneous than the typical African country. I mean, if you look at the countries in Europe, for instance, most of those countries, the so-called, sovereign republics, are actually distinct ethnicities. You have France for the French. You have Germany for the German people. You have England for the English people. You come to Tanzania, you find you have 40 different nationalities. You go to Uganda, maybe 20 or 30 nationalities. And what I'm trying to say is that even as we get hard on our people, I'm one of those who always remember that we've actually done much better and we have evolved much faster than some of the people who talk very badly about us. And that does not in any way excuse any of the really terrible and unfortunate things that give us, a bad name and a huge embarrassment in the contemporary world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Brian, what time are we supposed to terminate?
Judge, we were scheduled to finish at 4 o'clock.
At 4 o'clock. Now
it's 10 minutes to 4, Judge.
Right. Just on the issue raised, I think thank you very much to Muthomi for that response. I think one point which has been raised as a concern is dismissal of election petitions on technicalities. I think it's part of the jurisprudence we should be looking at, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And a point was earlier made, is when I think it was Judge Ogalo who was comparing the American Constitution and the constitutions of most of our countries, and saying the American Constitution is, I think if I remember well, it must be about 47 pages, but it's not a long constitution. And it has been interpreted in such a way that it helps societies to grow without necessarily amending the constitution itself. That issue was discussed in some fora where people said, right, why are the African constitutions that long? It's because of fear, so they said. Everything must be provided for, because if you're an African judge and you dare interpret the constitution in a purposive way, you are then accused of going outside the constitution and so on and so on. That's why you find African constitutions are several pages long, whereas the American constitution is perhaps 34, 47 pages long. But I think the question of fear is what I'm inviting Judge Ogalo to address with his experience on the bench, whether dismissing election petitions on technicalities is not some evidence that judges would not want to deal with the substance for fear of the result they might come to. And you can latch on technicalities and then dispose of the election petition on that basis. Judge Ogalo, would you want to say something from your own experience?
Thank you. Thank you, Judge. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Very good. I think you raise a very fundamental issue there. Every time I see a judgment that deals with technicality, I just shudder to think of what's going on. In our constitutions, I remember we're dealing with the Rwanda one, the Kenyan one, the Ugandan one, I believe even the Zimbabwe one. There is now a principle which says justice must be done above technical. considerations. So faced with the technicality and justice on the other hand, a judge should ask themselves, what is just in this case? Technicality, yes, you can get away with that, but I believe it's probably fear, either fear of repercussions, or maybe fear of venturing into analytical, intellectual stuff that makes people go the easy way, the quick way out, which is the technical. But I think we are appointed as judges not to do technicalities. That can be done by anybody else. We are appointed to be judges of what is just. And therefore, we should bend all the way backward and see what is just in any given issue. And I believe Americans have done very well on that one because they have had backbone and that intellectual aspect of judging the case at hand. And that takes genius. But we're not short of genius in Africa. We may be having a deficit of people who are strong-willed and have a backbone. But I'm strengthened by two examples now of nullifying elections. When I first came to the bench, you would have never have heard of a judge nullifying an election, particularly so a presidential. But ever since Kenya did it, Malawi has followed. I think now the way has opened for people to go deeper beyond technicality and look at the justice of the situation. I just pray that that road will not be sailed, that our judges will have the wherewithal to continue in that tradition, to really get to the bottom of things. Our constitutions are long because we've been legislating, so to speak, for a particular season. The Ugandan one was enacted in 1995, very soon after the catastrophe of the Amin in this country, who trampled all manner of rights. And so when the constitution came, it was a heavy duty on the right of this, the right of that, the right of the other. But in so doing, I think we make it almost specific to a situation. That said, let the judges do their work. Let them be resourceful. Let them have the genius to work out issues that will bring out justice instead of running over with technicalities. There was another fear, Judge Chinhengo, which was raised. I don't know if it was answered. I got off here now. But there was a question which was raised, I think, right at the start, whether technology is because we fear technology, meaning illiteracy, or whether it was a question of trust. I think it's probably both, but even more. In the more to that is the penetration of technology in the communities, both for the electorate and the candidate. In Uganda, we have a situation where many of the radio stations are owned by politicians or political forces. And some of these politicians also are running as candidates. So when you're a candidate and you own a radio station and your opponent comes to bring their manifesto on what you on your own station, I think there's a challenge there. That's one of the reasons why it's fit, because penetration is not fair, it's not deep. That's a little problem. The other one is the rural communities. We in the urban settings, we are now and about with technology. When I go back to my village, it's not the same way. I was there only this last weekend. And many of the candidates are running around the traditional way, which is meet the people, talk to the people, bribe the people, and all manner of things. And technology comes as a distant factor. So it's not just fear of technology's sake, no, indeed, just trust. There are many other reasons that are still wrapped around the issue of elections through technology. But you are right, Judge, at the beginning. There's no going back. Technology is here to stay. All of us need capacity building in that one. And elections are going to be so much more fun when we have all embraced the technology in this area. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you very much. I think we, as Brian said, I would want to give a minute or half a minute to each of us. I don't think that the idea of these webinar meetings is just to discuss and we leave it at that. And I'll leave it to Brian, the organizers,
Yes.
see what we can make of these discussions. And taking from Muthomi, who said we must interrogate these matters much more. What we know for certain now is that light has begun to shine insofar as the jurisprudence on election is concerned, with the examples of Kenya, Malawi, and so on. Light has begun to shine, but we have challenges that we continue to have to deal with. The handling of elections themselves, the issue of technology, leadership, corruption, and all these things. And I think this discussion is not just for the sake of it, for us to appear on the webinar and discuss and exchange views. There must be purpose. And that is what I would want to invite invite each of you have a second to see what is the way forward with this kind of discussion. How should we advance the issues or the ideas that we have and make them real to the extent that we can. So if you don't mind, I'll just give each one a minute for the way forward. And I think I'm quite in order, Brian, that we should be looking to terminate the meeting.
That's correct, Judge. Maybe after the 2-minute presentations, then we can terminate the conversation. And
also, of course, Brian, since you've been organizing, you might want to round off the whole discussion by as I say, what is the way forward after this? So shall I start with you, Ellen, and go around with everybody? The way forward, what is it we are going to make of this kind of discussion? What do we want to achieve? How are we going to go about it? Or just the question whether we should be discussing more and focusing on particular areas so that we can derive some tangible, practical benefit from discussions of this kind.
Thank you very much, Judge. And thank you very much, colleagues who organized this meeting. From my end, I think this platform was very important, and also the fact that we managed to share information, I think for me it's a very progressive thing. I do know that the server for the Kenya elections 2017 was in France. I actually learned that today. And in as much as we are talking about utilizing or using technology in view of the COVID, I think one thing that I also learned in this platform was the issue of confidence, the issue of trust. And from my end, I was actually grappling with the question, how do we as citizens, as domestic observers, monitor or observe technology? When you're looking at the issue of results management, for example, whereby you have a server in France, how do you ensure that information on that server can be validated, can be verified? How do we monitor as political parties? So it's a very good platform to share information. I hope we have more on this. And the fact that the organization has taken the issue of elections as a key issue for discussion, it also shows us that as Africans, we want to see democracy. We want to pursue democracy amid the COVID pandemic era. We want to see ways that we can employ as different countries, as lawyers, as citizens, as non-lawyers like ourselves, as elections experts, how we can push forward issues of democracy that we have been fighting for in the past number of years. So it's a very good platform to continue exchanging information, to share information, and also the fact that we're interacting with the former judges help in terms of your understanding and our understanding when it comes to legal matters pertaining to elections. So I really enjoyed the discussion, and I really enjoyed this platform, and I hope we have more platform to share information with regards to elections. Thank you very much to the organizers and to the chair. Thank you very much, Judge.
Just one little point I wanted to raise in regard to the postponement of elections in Zimbabwe. I think it's by the Election Management Board. I think it's the law is the same as in Kenya, where they cannot postpone the entire election, but they can postpone elections in a locality where violence is flared up, for instance. But that election still must be held within the time before the end of the term of parliament, and so on and so on. So it is a very limited power to postpone an election in a particular locality, but not nationally. Shall I will want to end with the judge on the way forward. Can we go to Anne?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Judge. For me, my takeaway is, how do we rebuild the trust? How do we work on people trusting the electoral process for it to be able to bring the said and the trusted leaders that they have put on the ballot? For me, that is what I would want to see. Will technology cure some of our problems? I'm not sure, because at the end of the day, who manipulates this technology? It is human beings. So we can have the best technology in the world, but if a human being is the one who is behind that server and doing all manner of mischief, then how do we trust this process? Then when I come to the aspect of, do we postpone elections or not? I remember in 2019, we were in Nigeria in February, and we woke up to the news that elections had been postponed. Remember, Nigeria was grappling with a lot of fake news. So first thing we believed was, oh, this is fake news. So we just woke up, went to the polling station, and only for us to be told that the elections have been postponed. And it brought, and everybody was put in disarray. So when it comes to the postponement of elections, how do we cure the mechanism of people trusting this process? Because at the end of the day, the question or the conversation that we're going on is, what are they cooking this time? So once we postpone these elections, once we cancel these elections, do we go back and rethink how the electorate are going to look into these issues? And also, the more things change, the more they remain the same. So for me is, can we work on our good manners? Have good manners when it comes to elections. Then in that process, then maybe we can trust the process. We've seen before the fall of the Berlin Wall, most countries in Africa were not holding any elections, but now even dictators are running to hold elections, periodic elections. But are they credible? Do they speak what the people want? That is something that we need to rethink. That is something we need to interrogate further. Yeah.
And that is, the way forward is for us to hold similar meetings, webinars, to interrogate these matters further, isn't it? Muthomi, anything further?
Yes, Judge, for me, one of the easy things to do is discussions like these should be transcribed and shared with all the attendees, and then left to each of us, given the complexity and diversity of Africa. It is very hard for us to come with a one-size-fits-all solution in view of that diversity, and then it will be up to those of us who have a stake in various African countries to pick what would work for us. The only general point I would make for our beloved continent is that Africans, who include you and me, must create institutions that work for them. They must enact laws that work for them. Our problem actually is a paradox of very elaborate laws and institutions that achieve everything except working for the African people. And the moment we figure out how to do that, and the person who is to figure out how to do that is the ordinary citizen of Africa. Once the ordinary citizen starts demanding that they want democracy and not a fake democracy, once they start demanding that they want services, they want an end to poverty, they want an end to underdevelopment, they want an end to death from curable diseases, until our ordinary citizens, not the elites like you and me, until those ordinary masses start attributing their fortunes in life to the quality of democracy, the quality of leadership in their countries, we shall speak from the mountaintops, but will not achieve much. Thank you very much.
Including fashioning election procedures that save our people.
Yes.
Judge Ogola, final words on this? Your final word
yes,
on this?
Judge. Thank you, and to thank all my fellow panelists and all those who participated. You, Mr. Moderator, thank you so much. Let me conclude with 2 3 thoughts. Thought one is we live in abnormal times. This kind of corona has blanketed everything that we know as normal, turned everything up and down as abnormal. We are therefore struggling with putting a square peg round hole. Our institutions and our legal processes for actions were never made for times such as these. They were made for normal times. Now have abnormal time. With that comes unprecedented challenges, of course also unprecedented opportunities. And I think I've learned one thing from this discussion, that technology as the way of the future for our electoral process. But we have to do it gradually. We cannot overnight go from the traditional to the digital. We have to take time as we build that highway technology. The most immediate issue for me is a choice that each country has made. A choice between human life and human rights. Postponing maybe is pretty radical, but when you post it against human life, I think you will go the postponement would. Because after all, elections are about governance. And you can govern a population is in quarantine. You can't govern a population that's in ICU. You certainly not ban a population that is in the grave. So, given hard case and a rock, I for one would give precedence to life. And if postponing means to do in bits and pieces, if that's possible, maybe geographically, why not? Or in the case of Ghana, for instance, have a generation, the presidential, the parliamentary, the local government, all of them on the same day. Maybe we could postpone some and go ahead with others. But if the tough issue comes, and postpone, in any case under our constitution, when you postpone, it's for 2 reasons. Either a state of emergency, which is by resolution of government for only 6 months, then you go back and review, or be a state of war. Now that one is also viewable. You postpone indefinitely. You go back and review and see if and when the time is right for carrying out a nation. The opposite of all that is that even if you own an election, this crisis, issues are you have achieved what the Constitution had in mind, which is free, fair, trustworthy, an election of integrity? Will you have it in the circumstances where Christ? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everybody before I call on Brian to close the meeting. I want to thank everybody. I think this discussion is a good discussion and is one that we must pursue in the future. I'm very certain that on the side of the African Judges and Jurists Forum, it will be very happy to again ensure that we can hold such discussions. And I think the important point so far as I'm concerned is we must, as Africans, do better. And I'm sure we can. I think Muthomi is equally concerned. We are all concerned about we Africans developing institutions that work for us, ensuring that we do better for ourselves. We have no one to cry to. We have no one who will come to assist us. And again, as Judge Ogalo has just said, technology has come and it's a permanent feature of our life. We've got to leverage on it to the best of our ability. Brian, I'm sure you had in mind the way forward as well. And these are my last words. You can close the meeting. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Judge. I think you will all agree that you did a splendid job of directing and moderating the conversation. And quite a number of things have emerged. Unfortunately, due to time, we were not able to explore all the issues that were raised in the Q&A, all the issues that were raised in the chats, that I think if we had the time, we would have been able to have a more robust conversation. But what I take from that is that there is need to have more of these discussions and to broaden not just the scope of topics that we discuss, but also just to broaden the audiences that we bring on board. I think the point was raised that there is need to make this discussion not just amongst lawyers, but to broaden the discussion to bring in others. There's also need to do quite a bit of content creation. There are a lot of emerging issues that have been discussed, which need people to look at and to interrogate it at a much deeper level. There's need for us to start to look at the role that technology will play in elections going forward, because it's definitely going to be an issue that is going to come up. We need to look at how the courts will handle this technology. How do we train judges to deal with a server that is based in France, or issues that are emerging because of failures of technology to work on election day. There's also need for us to start to explore whether there's a need to look at and develop model laws that could serve Africa and that could serve us, that are not just copy and paste products, but are nuanced and look at the African context in its peculiarities and the detail that we need to look at for these issues to be properly reinforced and to ensure that we don't end up with election petitions. Because the long and short of it is, when we are at a petition stage, that means that the downstream processes, the upstream processes have failed. And we need to strengthen these institutions upstream to ensure that the courts are not put in the situation where they have to decide on elections. So there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done. There's quite a big chunk of work that AJJF will have to put in. We have started some of the processes. We have coming out in the next couple of weeks a detailed a compendium of articles which are looking at some of the issues that we've discussed today. And hopefully we should be able to share this with judges to equip them to be able to look at these emerging jurisprudential issues with a little more detail. Judge, I think from my end, beyond thanking the participants, beyond thanking the panelists, those are the few remarks that I wanted to make in closing. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you very much. And we apologize to those who had put in questions which we have not had the time to answer. But thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Bye.